All right, everyone. Today we are going to review a couple of things. Before we do that, let's talk about this week. This week we are going to review two standards from Unit 3, which is back in January and February. We're going to review those standards and we're going to reassess those standards to replace lower grades or to replace your Unit 3 grade for two standards. And then next week we'll do two more, and the next week we'll do two more. And that will pretty much cover us for Unit 3. So this will be a chance for you to change some lower grades, to bring up your grade, and to be able to do it, though, you have to do the assignments this week. So let's get started. Before we begin, let's go back and review these problems. All right, we have to solve this equation. This is a quadratic equation. So to solve a quadratic equation, you have to do one of the rules. The one we're going to use today is the square root method, because we have a whole side that's being squared. So we're going to get rid of it by taking the square root of both sides. And what happens is that square root cancels out that square, and you're left with x plus 7 equals, now when you take the square root, remember it's two answers, there's a plus and a minus 6, right? So now it turns it to linear, which now we can go back and just use our linear rules. I want to take this positive 7 to the other side. The way you do that is you subtract. So it'll be x equals negative 7 plus or minus 6. All right, and that's going to give us, remember, it's quadratic, so that tells us there's two answers. There's that little squiggly mark I can never make on the board. Our two answers are going to be negative 7 plus 6. So negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. And then negative 7 minus 6. Negative 7 minus 6 is negative 13. All right. So just a quick reminder, that's what that looks like. This kind of problem, all right, same thing. Sometimes our answer on the right side is not a perfect square. We just leave it. All right. I don't want the decimal in this one. So we have a squared on both sides, or we have a square on one side. We're going to get rid of it. So I want to square root both sides. The square root cancels out the square. So we have x plus 4 equals. Now there's no square root of 21. I can't even simplify this. So I'm going to leave it alone. And I'm going to say plus or minus the square root of 21. All right. I'm still going to do the same thing we did on the other problem. I'm still going to get x by itself, because that's the whole point. It says solve the equation. So I want to take that 4 across the other side. It's positive, so I'm going to make it a negative. X equals negative 4 plus or minus 21. Square root of 21. Sorry about that. And that's my answer. I could take it down to decimal. We could use a calculator. We could plug in a calculator and get a decimal. But for today's purposes, all we're doing is we're going to write negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 21. Right? And that's how that works. I'll let you take a look at that real quick. And then we're going to apply that. The reason I did that is those are going to be in our problems today. Today, what we're doing is we're completing the square. All right, we're going to complete the square, and in a way to solve the equation. Now remember, there's a lot of ways to solve a quadratic equation, but the one we're working on this week is completing a square. And if you remember the steps, or the questions, sometimes they'll do the problem and they'll say, hey, what's the next step? So you can't go back and do your calculator, do polysolve, or do Desmos or anything like that. You've got to know the steps here. All right, written out the steps, get this constant by itself, the C by itself to the right side, leave the space. All right, fill the space by taking half of B and squaring it. All right, I wrote that there. Add it to both sides. We're going to factor the left side and add the right side. And then we're going to solve the equation, what we just did on the previous screen. All right, I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm going to leave the steps and put the steps on the homework. So all we got to do is follow those steps. So it says get the C or the constant to the right side. I need to take this 24 and I need to put it over there. So the way you put a positive 24 to the right side is you say x squared minus 14x, leave the space, all right, leave the space, equals negative 24. So that's step one. Step two, fill in the space by taking half of b and squaring it. So remember, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So my b is negative 14. So half of negative 14 is negative 7. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. This will always be a positive because when you square something, it turns it positive. Make sure you add it to both sides. So step two, fill the space by taking half of b and squaring it and add it to both sides. So step two is done. Step three says factor the left side. If you remember, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to get 49 and add to get 14, negative 14. Okay, well, in these problems, it will always be the square root of that number. So the square root of 49 is 7. Two numbers that multiply to get 49, 7 times 7, and add to get negative 14, negative 7 times negative 7. So it will always be squared equals negative 24 plus 49 equals 25. See why I went over the problems on the previous screen? All right, so we factored the left side and we added the right side. So now we solve the equation like we did on the previous page. So this is a square root problem. We're going to take the square root of both sides. X minus 7, because the square root cancels out the square, equals the square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. Now it turns into a linear equation, so I want to take that 7 and I want to move it to the other side. X equals, since it's a negative 7, it's going to be 7 plus or minus 5. So my two answers that I'm looking for, this is the solution. 7 plus 5 is 12, and 7 minus 5 is 2. Sorry for the sloppy work. But my answers, my two solutions, all right, we did step 4. My two solutions are 12 and 2. All right, that means if we went up here and we plugged 12 into for x here and here, it would come out to be equal 0. If we plugged in 2 for here and here, it would come out to equal 0. All right, so those are your steps. Step 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to do 2 more problems. Oops, got to go to the next page. All right. Now this one, notice this one has a 2 in the front. We can't do this problem until we get rid of that 2. All right, and we're going to make it easy for you this week. It will always be divisible. Everything will be divisible by whatever that number is. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. Get rid of it. And that's going to turn my answer or my problem back into something I can do. 2 divided by 2 here is x squared. 32 divided by 2, negative 16x. 26 divided by 2 is 13. And negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. What that does is now it gives me a problem just like the last page, right? Don't let this negative 2 freak you out. Remember, we're just following the rules. Follow the steps. Step 1, get the C to the right side. Here's C. I need to move it over. Leave the space. So x squared minus 16x, leave the space, equals negative 15, because this is positive 13 going over. So that becomes a negative 13 over there, so it's negative 15. So step 1, done. Step 2, fill a space by taking half of b. So half of negative 16 is negative 8, and squaring it. Negative 8 squared is positive. This will always be positive, 64 to both sides. So step 2, half of b is square it to both sides, done. Factor it. This will always factor. If we're doing it right, this will always factor to parentheses squared. Two numbers that multiply to get 64 and add to get 16 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 16. Negative 8 plus negative 8 is negative 16. Sorry, positive 64. Equals negative 15 plus 64 over here is 49. Now we're right back to solving the equation. This is a square root problem. So I'm going to take the square root to both sides. This is going to be x minus 8. The whole point to take the square root of both sides is to get rid of that squared. Square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. A lot of times these will come out to be nice and pretty. The next problem it won't, and I'll show you what to do. So I take the 8 over. I want to remember we're solving for x. So take that negative 8 over, it'd be positive 8 plus or minus 7. Don't forget, it's always plus or minus when you take the square root of a number here. So my answer is 8 plus 7 is 15. And then 8 minus 7 is 1. All right, so we did all the steps again. All right, the only difference on this problem, there was a 2 in front, and we just divided everything by 2. Last one. So the last one, I wanted to do this one because it didn't come out nice and pretty like the last two. So I'll go through this one a little bit quicker. You can always go back and watch it. Okay, so get the c by itself. I'm sorry, to the other side. So we're going to take that over. So that'd be x squared plus 12x. Leave the space, equals 22. Fill the space by taking half of b. So step 2, half of b and square it. Right, there's the example. Half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is 36. Remember, it's always positive because when you square something, it's going to be positive to both sides. All right, just follow the rules. Steps right there. Step 2, done. Step 3, factor it. It will always factor to a parentheses squared. And this number will always be the square root of this number. So x plus 6, all right, it'll be the square root of that number, and it will always be whatever that sign is. 22 plus 36 on this side is 58. So now we have a square root problem, and we're going to square root to both sides. When we square root both sides, that gives me x plus 6 equals plus or minus. Now this one, the other ones were perfect squares, but 58 is not perfect. I can't even simplify it, so I'm not even going to give you all the nightmares that you had when we had to simplify these things. I can't even simplify 58. All right, it's 2 and 29. They're not perfect, so it's just plus or minus the square root of 58. Actually, this problem is a little easier than the other ones because I don't have to do anything other than, all right, take the 6 across the other side. X equals, that's my curly Q, sorry, negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 58. And I'm done. So please go back and watch these again if you have to. I'll put it on my YouTube channel without the Edpuzzle so that you can go back and look at those. But practice, I'm giving you 4 problems to do for homework or for classwork, and that's it.